Welcome to today's episode of the Grind Road to Success podcast, the place to be if you want to learn how to set yourself apart from the competition and reach your highest potential. I'm your host, Zak Krysak, and if you haven't already yet, hit the subscribe button so you never miss out on another podcast episode and the many tips, tricks, and strategies that can help you reach your highest potential. Without further ado, let's get into it. So welcome back to another episode of the Grind Road to Success podcast, where we sit down and talk with other athletes, coaches, and professionals, gaining new insights and perspectives on how you can perform at your highest potential. So today we have the pleasure to sit down and talk with Blaine Mackie. Blaine is a very accomplished athlete, physiotherapist, and business owner where he operates numerous clinics and gyms. Blaine has taught other athletes, individuals, and professionals internationally, where he was invited to join an American strength delegation in China and Russia. He was also invited to join and teach a physiotherapy and strength seminar in Qatar before the COVID year. Blaine is also an avid powerlifter, competing at some of the highest levels and competitions. So thanks for joining us on the podcast today, Blaine.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it. I actually sound better when it comes out of your mouth than when I write it down.
I love it. I love it. Blaine, diving into things, kind of tell us a bit about your background experience, whether that's in the athletic world and kind of what led you to the point you're at and level today.
Well, thanks, Zach. I appreciate your invite to the podcast. I think it's kind of neat to be able to reach out to all the people that you are invested in. My story is a little bit interesting. It started back. I'm actually a Manitoba farm boy, and so nothing special there other than working on the farm. But unfortunately, I went through a really bad accident when I was 16. Had a lot of injuries to my body, spent a good part of the year rehabbing from a broken neck and broken back and pelvis, femur, dislocated shoulders, fractured ribs. It was pretty bad. And I was in a coma for about 2 months before I woke up and had to start my rehab. So I was 16 when that happened. And then ever since that day, I found that strength was a huge part of me just being able to stay alive, manage my chronic pain, manage my injuries. And I've got quite a disability in my spinal cord now. So I've got a spinal cord injury, which has resulted in part of my body being quite a bit weaker and the other side not being able to feel hot, cold, or pain. So that's really the basis. I didn't understand it at the time, but then eventually as time went on, I actually understood that, okay, maybe I want to do rehab. And so between trying to keep my body strong and going and trying to get into physiotherapy, that's where it really all took off, because then I had the knowledge and the licensing and actually to move forward. So physiotherapy started back in 1990. And then what happened there is that when I got licensed as a physiotherapist, that gave me the expertise to start teaching and training people. I didn't need any other further credentialing because as physiotherapists, we have a very good medical and physiological knowledge of the body that allowed me to start working with both rehabilitation patients and also athletes. That kind of catapulted me into where I met with some people down in South Dakota, because I worked in the United States for 2 years. And during that time, I was picked up by one of the local powerlifting teams. I was just doing my strength stuff in the gym and they kind of noticed. And then all of a sudden I met with these guys that were really, really strong. And I got really engaged in the strength side of it. So from that point forward, that's been where it's gone. I've just loved to lift heavy things. And then I use both the concept of the strength component along with what I've done for my body rehabilitative wise, and then move forward to teach other people that there's a lot the body can accomplish, but it's going to take some time. From there, it kind of catapulted into me owning my own clinic. I have my own powerlifting gym. I have a couple of clinics, and then also getting asked to teach throughout the United States. I've been to New York a few times. I've been to Pittsburgh, Chicago. I was lucky enough to be involved with the Russian and China's delegation, where I learned and taught over there for strength training. And Qatar is really cool with teaching there. So I've enjoyed that. That's going to be part of my future too, as I get older here. Hopefully I can bring some of that knowledge to some other people as we go through. So that's kind of that's a shorter version, because it's fairly in depth, but it gives me kind of puts you where I am now today.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's a great story and lots of experience there, of course. I want to ask you, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you find within especially strength training world? So, especially athletes that want to be able to get to the next level, reach their highest potential. What are some misconceptions you find, on that lifting side of things that athletes can, do to limit injury, or just stay more healthy along their journey and process?
I think one of the things that I've seen over my career anyways is the concept that nobody trains recovery. It's still pretty apparent out there that when somebody's not doing well, the concept is find a new periodized program, find a new training component, try and find a new training style. When a lot of the times I've found that recovery is critical, where people are training maybe in excess. I think there's a sliding scale for that. When you're younger, it definitely, you can train more, but I think that gets caught up where that's then the rule. As they move into their middle ages and 40s and 50s, which people are still athletes, they're still trying to train at a 20-year-old level. And to be honest with you, that misconception is bad. I totally don't agree with that. I think when they get into their late 30s, 40s, and 50s, they've got to learn that recovery is critical. So then you take that to the next level and you say, well, why wouldn't we expand on that with somebody that has great genetic potential at 20 and make sure we're training recovery? So that means everything from the nutrition. Nutrition is pretty common out there right now, but what I see is, what about rest? What about actually blood flow? And that's something that nobody really trains. There's lots of podcasts out there on sleep, et cetera, but to actually get a coach to start talking about rest, recovery, blood flow, et cetera. So what we're finding now, and what I'm doing with myself, there's a lot of extra training in my game, but my extra training is blood flow. So if I work out, say tomorrow, I'll be doing my bench workout, and then probably Tuesday, Wednesday, I'll be doing some light 10-pound dumbbell work just to flush the same area with blood. Hot and cold. Now that's pretty big out there right now, and I don't think a lot of people are doing that. But again, what is it for? It's blood. Massage, blood, everything is based on that. If you do not have that really awesome blood flow to the areas that you need it, they don't recover as well. And most recently I was been chatting, and maybe I'm talking out of my scope, but it's a matter of, I don't think the heart does a really good job. And maybe some of the cardio people are going to slap me for this, and maybe lots of trainers will, but I honestly don't think the heart does just enough to keep you alive. Okay, it's moving blood throughout the body. I think that's great. But when you train an area, that area then again needs more blood in order to recover. How do you do that? Well, the heart isn't automatically say, hey, you train the pecs, you filled them up with blood during your training, but 4 days later, it's not doing that anymore. Okay, so why can't I flush it with blood some more 3-4 days later? Absolutely. So I think the heart does okay, but I think the body needs to be stimulated through more specific, maybe a little bit of higher volume work, lighter loads, so that you get more blood to that area. Now it's recovered a little bit more, so you can go back and train heavy again. Understanding that my training is, for the most part, totally neural. And what does that mean? Well, I'm still sticking within that 3-rep zone, because my job, I'm not looking at getting on the stage. I'm not looking at bulking up. I'm not looking at putting on miles of hypertrophy size. I'm just wanting to get my nervous system to run. That leads me into the fact that we know that the nervous system starts to become disassociated with us as we get older, meaning that the nervous system, if you're not going to use it well, it's not going to be there to be used. So part of our training philosophy is always working on a neural component. I get the fact that hypertrophy of muscle mass is important, and you get your fair share from heavy lifting, but we do find that our nervous system, if it's not used over time, you lose it. So it's a big answer. I apologize, but I think blood flow recovery is critical, that we don't talk about that enough. And I think we need to keep stimulating the nervous system.
So you speak of that kind of nervous system component. How important is that mind muscle, body connection, especially when you're lifting, training to get stronger, get faster, whatever it may be? How can you, implement that, especially when you're training in the season, or just staying consistent?
Yeah, the mind body thing I think is really important. I think I might get slapped for this too, but I think less so when it comes to moving load. Now, I appreciate when we talk about mind body, it's more of a bodybuilding philosophy where you want to be really focused in on the technique, the full range of motion. You're thinking about the muscle contracting. I think that's beautiful. And I think for me, that's a recovery model. But when I get to my training, when I'm looking for explosiveness, when we look at the athletic model, I'm looking for I want to move a fairly large load as fast as I can. There's two ways to stimulate the type 2 fibers or the nervous system that we want to use for strength. One is explosiveness. Number two is load. That's the only really two ways. Less hypertrophic, but more neural system engagement. So you're getting more of those motor neurons engaging and moving that load. So I think the mind body thing from the bodybuilding style is really, again, thinking about that range of motion, that contraction. The mind body, from my perspective, is how hard can I stimulate that system? So that would be my pre 1RM mind muscle kind of connection where I'm ready to lift the entire truck. So that stimulates more motor neurons in our case, in my opinion, because it's going to bring in that sympathetic nervous system is going to be ramped up to 100%. The adrenaline's pumping. That means all my motor neurons are going to be engaged. So that's the two styles I see there. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, for sure. And yeah, those are
Okay.
some very interesting points. Just that different range, that load kind of rep, and how much you're, yeah, lifting at the moment. But I want to just kind of ask you, how important is the routine side of things? So you kind of mentioned, the sleep, just the nutrition a bit, but how important is it to stay consistent? And yeah, just the specific season you may be in. So whether it's training in the, during your season or off the season, how important is that routine just to stay consistent, stay healthy, and also that recovery process a bit?
Yeah, the consistency of the scheduling is pretty critical in my mind. Partially because the body is not going to change over a week or two. The body's going to change over 8 months to a year, 2 years, depending on the flow. So we can do the 4-year Olympic pattern. I run usually 1-year powerlifting patterns because I am older. But I think one of the most important parts is when the body is being asked to adapt, because that's all we're doing is asking it to adapt to another level. If you don't repetitively stimulate that consistently, that level won't be achieved. That even goes for rehab. When we look at physiotherapy and taking people through injuries, the more consistently they can stimulate that area, the more the blood gets pushed to that area, the more it has to adapt. When we look at athletes, the same thing. More consistently they can give that body part a stimulus, the more it's going to adapt. That also comes into the fact when you're actually asking the nervous system to react. So let's say you have 100 motor units. When you're training, in our training, our neural training, we're trying to access all 100. It's really hard for it to do it if you're only doing it occasionally and not in routine. If you do it scheduled and it's every week, you've got your schedule laid out and you're stimulating, the body starts to recognize that. And when it recognizes what you're doing, it opens up the channels where those motor neurons can be stimulated more accessibly. So that's critical as you're doing it. So I actually even tell people, I said, look, you got to schedule it into your day timer, and that's non-negotiable. You just have to continue hitting it over and over, or the body doesn't adapt. And what we do know too is when people quit training, they actually lose it very quickly. When you're 20, not so bad. When you're 50, you can lose it over a couple, 3 weeks of non-training. So that schedule is critical.
Yeah, that's very interesting, especially for, athletes that are competing at a high level. They have those really hectic schedules where they're always on the go. Staying consistent can be a huge thing. But yeah, especially as you get to that next level, as you get older, being able to stay consistent is a lot more important, just to maintain that strength and that muscle mass. Yeah, what are some other strategies and skills that you've kind of learned along the way, to help you, perform at your maximum potential? So, like you said, that the health piece, just staying healthy and consistent. But what allows you to, stay disciplined as well, and like you say, get the non-negotiables done each day, so you can continue to get the results you want long term.
I think two things is critical in this: stubbornness, and I think sacrifice. Stubbornness meaning that the schedule's set, and no matter what happens, you will continue to train. You will continue to do what you need to do to get to that next level. I think as soon as you let other aspects of your life interfere with that, then all of a sudden, some of those training times or efforts that you're making to become the better athlete become negotiable. Well, I've got a birthday party, or unfortunately, but somebody dies. My dad died. I was back training a day later. Okay. Maybe that was my grieving process. But if you miss, that's the sacrifice you have to do. So as soon as things become negotiable, it won't work as well. The other thing is, again, sacrifice, being able to put other parts of your life aside in order to achieve what you need to do, because the work has to be put in. So if people aren't willing to sacrifice, that includes everything from work to family to training, doesn't matter what it is. But you got to figure out what your goal is and how important it is to you. And then you have to sacrifice some of those other things that maybe your friends are doing or your family's doing in order to achieve that. If you're not willing to sacrifice, you're probably not going to make it.
So yeah, talking about that point of sacrifice, I kind of just think the word pain comes to my mind. You know, especially when we want to, get the results we want. We want to be able to reach that higher potential. We got to be able to do the things that we may not necessarily like. But yeah, being able to, push through that pain, understanding that nothing great comes easy, especially in the gym, right? No pain, no gain. But yeah, how, do you use anything from like a mindset point of view or kind of stance where you're able to utilize that pain, kind of push through it, whether it be just kind of harnessing those emotions of anger, to create a higher output in the gym? How does that kind of connect, and how do you utilize that to, perform at your maximum potential and be able to lift heavier, stronger, whatever it may be?
Oh, Zach, that's pulling pretty deep on me. I'll bring you back to the intro, and that's my injury. Um, I don't know too many people that went through that level of injury that aren't in a wheelchair or a bed right now. So to be honest, Zach, that's all I need. If I'm gonna survive that, um, there's no amount of pain right now that I won't endure in order to achieve. That's yeah, that was pretty deep. Yeah, because what I went back through then, I had to learn how to walk again. There's just a lot of shit in that story that motivates me. That there is no lay down, there is no. It's just yeah, it's just unbroken. You will not break me. So it doesn't matter what the pain is. It doesn't matter what the process is. Um, I think The Rock was known to state in a few of his statements that you will not outwork me. I have no problems taking that on. I'll outwork anybody, and the pain is irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. It's not even in the context of communication with me. There won't be anything that stops me. So that's one of the things that I've done. Like just recently, my best squat ever was 515 in the States, and that was in gear with knee wraps, double red bounded knee wraps. And I was 28, I think, at the time. To last Saturday, I just squatted 520 just with some knee sleeves and a belt. So I'm going further than that. I'm going to continue to go further than that. And I just don't judge me. I just move. So that whole mindset with respects to pain and how you work through some of the adversities, to me, that's simple. I don't even, it's not in the dialogue. It's like, this is where you go. You decide whether you're going to come with me or not. That's all there is to it. I have no, yeah, I don't even know if I've ever communicated that before in my life. That's just what I do. So if there's a difficult situation in front of me, lay it down. Let's get at it. And I don't really
I
care if I
love it.
fail. Yeah, like honestly, I don't care if I fucking fail or not. I don't care. I'll get up and I'll hit it again, and I'll hit it again, and I'll hit it again. I've done that all my life because I had difficulties getting out of school because I wasn't really that good of a work ethic back then because I was lost. So people say, well, how did you get where you got? I just kept going. It took me 3 years to get into physio. I failed every year. It took me, like, no university would accept me. The only one that accepted me was the University of Regina. And I had to go in through a grade 12 repeat program. Part of that is because I missed a year of school with my injury. And, but there again, it's not in the dialogue. It's not in the narrative where I just said, oh, I guess I can't do that. What? Never said before. We'll never say it again. So you move forward. That's the same thing with the athletes that we train. Like, what do you mean you can't show up? Okay, I'm done. I don't need to train you then. That's just not in the dialogue. So sorry, a little bit passion there coming out, but a little bit of look, if I went through what I went through, then you know what? You're even hanging on to me or you're not part of the team.
I love it. I love that mindset, Blaine. Yeah, especially for other athletes who want to be able to reach their highest potential and get through those adversities, right? And the biggest thing I learned after playing athletics my entire life, playing at that collegiate level, is that everyone is struggling with something. We're all going through pain, whether you see it or not, but who's going to show up and put in the work to be the best? Because only 1%, can be the best, especially at that professional level. So what are you doing to become the 1%? And that's stepping outside of our comfort zone, right? That's doing the things we don't like and implementing that discipline, like you say, to just have that mindset where we're showing up every single day, no matter how we feel, we're going to get what we need done, and we're going to do it again tomorrow and the next day. And it's non-negotiable. And I feel like, that's going to put you so much further ahead. Even if you're not having a great day, you wake up, you're feeling sluggish, not feeling the best, right? Just doing something, putting in that work to get 1% better each day is going to put you so much further ahead than, putting in some work one day, taking a day off or taking a weekend off and expecting to get ahead. So yeah, that's a great insight there, Blaine. And that's, very interesting perspective.
Well,
Um,
I think Zach, just building on that is the fact that, boy, look at the internet and look at how many coaches there are out there, and every coach is trying to grab a piece of the pie by saying, hey, this program's the best program, this training method is the best, the West Side, the 531, the I don't know, there's like 1,000 different programs out there. Everybody's reaching for that next best program, and that's how it's being marketed. You know what? Suck it up and just show up. And just show up. I could give you the shittiest program in the world. You freaking show up every week with me and train, your body's going to adapt. So I think beyond all, when we look at everything for athletes and rehab and stuff like that, you got to keep kind of attending. You got to keep giving it everything you got every chance you get, as opposed to searching for that next best program. Now, there's some variables, and I think other people think too. I tried this program and it didn't work. It's taken me, oh my God, 30, 35, 35, 37 years to figure out what works for my body. And I've tried lots of different things, but every body responds differently. You could take the same group, put them into the same program. Each one's going to respond differently. But you have to have the ability to experiment, analyze, assess, and repeat to find out if what that program is doing or that mindset you're using is valuable. How is it valuable? You're making gains somewhere, somehow. Most people don't want to do that. Most people don't want to self-analyze. Oh my God, I failed. Okay, so in my mindset, if I failed, let's switch it up. Let's change it. Let's move on to the next level. A lot of people just get caught up in, oh, I'm just going to go get another program off the internet. Whatever.
Yeah, that's some very interesting insight and perspectives there. Yeah, just getting those, new perspectives about different programs, like you say, or different things that work for certain people, right? Not everything is going to work for the same person. You just
Yep.
got to implement. All right, like you say, am I getting better each day? Am I growing? Okay, we're seeing progress. If we're failing, okay, what can we adapt? Like you say, twist and tweak to move forward. But that's, one thing I see with so many athletes, especially relating to when they get in a slump or things aren't going the way they want. What I see is so many athletes that I coach is they try to change every single thing, especially, after one bad game, is they try to change their entire approach, their entire swing shot, whatever it may be. And it screws even more things up moving forward compared to just staying consistent and making that minor tweak right here and there, to help you stay consistent with your process and actually get the results you want. But yeah, that's some very interesting insights there relating to, yeah, how athletes can stay consistent, be able to reach that maximum potential. But I want to ask you now, what does achieving and performing at peak potential mean to you, Blaine?
For me specifically, peak potential means that my nervous system is ready to react when it needs to react. So that means, what do I do up to where I'm going to do a max squat or a max deadlift or a max bench, whatever the case may be. So what have I done in my ritual in order to achieve that? So each athlete, I think, needs to create a ritual. I think the process of, we'll call it not the powders, but a pre-workout ritual. Pre-workout for me is establishing, I'm about 24 hours and then I start my ritual, okay, before I go in to lift. So my ritual starts usually about Friday afternoon. My mindset starts to switch into that's what I'm thinking about. Friday night, I have several things that I do. Saturday morning, I have several things that I do. Then Saturday, we meet at the gym with the training partners and then we start. But that all prepares the mind for the war. The mind just doesn't establish oh, I'm going to lift really heavy right now. I think the mind has to be prepared that there's a battle coming. And then that whole system starts to create what it needs to prepare for that war as you're going through on that. So that's kind of, I'm not sure if I've answered that correctly, but that's kind of what I do in order to get there. So those rituals are pretty critical for me as I develop that.
Yeah, that's a very great point right there, especially on the preparation side of things, where you're preparing the day before, right? Even if it's a game practice lift, you're preparing well in advance compared to just showing up and expecting to, right, lift heavy or have a great game, have a good practice.
Yeah.
Like you say, getting in the right mindset as well is super important to perform at peak potential and get that nervous system wired, like you say.
Yeah. Another side to that too, and I get a little offside, but I think it's important too, because in our facility, in our gym, when we work with athletes, our biggest component is just creating raw strength. By raw strength, I just want to stimulate their nervous system in order to achieve what they should be able to, where they're stimulating all 100 motor units. We in our facility don't get very far, hardly at all, into sport specific training. Reason is because, do I look like I can swing a baseball bat, Zak? Do I look like I can throw a ball? Not that well, let me tell you. I don't curl. I don't run football runs. I don't run ladders. I don't do any of that because that's not what we do in our facility. So we get our athletes ready to train or to compete based on, we'll create raw strength, explosive strength, speed strength. Then from there, coach, you take them. So if I was to do a baseball player, I give them back to you. Now you teach the swing mechanics. So you take that raw strength, like that piece of structure, and then you start molding it and it's what you want it to be. So that's what we do with our athletes when we look at the training concepts and getting them ready for that pitch or hockey arena or on the field, whatever the case may be. So that's one of the things I wanted to put forward with our style of training. I call it the dumb down method, because maybe we're not as smart as some other people, but the athletes are stupid strong.
Interesting. Yeah, just different ways that you can implement and utilize performance, right? No matter what sport you play. So yeah, you guys focusing more on the strength side of things, and that's gone well for you. Lots of athletes have, myself too. For those who don't know, I was first trained by Blaine Mackie way back in the day, and yeah, I just want to kind of pivot to the importance of form now and what you kind of think about that, because I remember growing up when I was being trained by you, we wouldn't put a weight on that bar until it had to have been 2 months in until we got the proper form down. And I feel like that helped me, long term to the lifts I do today, being able to, increase that strength, that mass, whatever it may be. But yeah, how important is that form side of thing to, stay healthy, that recovery side as well, but be able to maximize your lifts, your potential, and yeah, grow long term.
Yeah, absolutely, Zach. The technique style of things is very important in our facility. Every one of our physios lifts, whether they're power lifters or weightlifters, and are pretty strict with respects to technique. Nobody gets to move forward until they've actually got that technique level that is at what we feel is close to where it I guess they qualify to get to the next level. If they don't, and we have athletes that are or rehab patients that need to get to that next level of strength, if we don't have that technique dialed in, then that actually just increases the risk for injury down the road. Okay, so let's talk about things like the depth of the squat. Well, there's lots of different thoughts out there, but a squat is a squat. And if you need to compete at a Canadian powerlifting level, you have to hit a certain depth. If you need to jump, you do not have to do an ass to grass squat. So it all depends on what comes in the door, but from the start of a squat to the end of a squat, the technique is still the same. So making sure that that technique is dialed in 100% is critical. Now, if they are people that just have to get to just a living level, we may just have them do a technique-based squat off of a bench, so they don't have to worry about depth, that sort of stuff. But we engage technique from the brain right down to the toes. What does that mean? Well, if their mindset isn't right and they haven't done the ritual, their mind isn't there. I've seen people, and myself included, if I'm not really dialed in, I'll have an injury doing warm-up because I'm not thinking about what I need to do. So technique starts from the mind, the nervous system, and then it flows out to the body. After that, you have the physics. So then the physics of the hip versus the knee versus the back versus the shoulders versus what you're doing with the thoracolumbar fascia, what you're doing with your hamstrings, what are you doing with your position on your feet. There's so many different aspects, and that does take time to actually teach. And again, repetitive nature of doing it in order that people get that learned value out of that. So technique is critical, and that's in every motion, every position, and every movement pattern. What's interesting is there's some really good data out there and really good athletes and really good coaches out there that are doing it, but we still see time and time again people doing poor technique. Yeah, I can't emphasize enough. You can't get through our clinic with our physios without having really good technique.
Yeah, no, and that's very interesting how, like you say, everything's connected from that mind, that muscle, might, right, that body overall, and how it just optimizes performance, like you say, to achieve and complete those heavy lifts or have that really strenuous long game that you can, last to the fourth quarter, the third period, whatever it may be, and staying consistent throughout that process. Yeah, so that's a
Yeah.
very interesting insight and perspective, like you say, how it's not just showing up to the gym and just implementing that physical side of thing. It's preparing beforehand and implementing that ritual and routine, like you say.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I've actually kicked people out of the gym because their mind wasn't set. Um, Again, if your mind is not in what you need to be doing and you're actually lifting heavy, um, if your mind's not there, you don't need to be there, to be honest with you. Because I expect when people work with me that their mind is engaged. If it's not, then it's time to go home. Some people would say you could do something else, and yeah, sure you can. But your mind has to be there no matter what. So if the mind does not come prepared to do the work, the mind is not prepared to engage the system the way it should be engaged in order to manage the loads that is put upon it. So again, if they're not engaged, then it's not necessarily a spot for them to be at that day, because that's when the risk of injury increases. There's a couple of components to those, and I think the Russians did it, to my knowledge, the first, called autogenic training, and basically a training method by when you come in, your mindset's there, you do your warm up, but you know what? That may or may not be the day that is perfect for you. Whatever is happening, the hormonal system is off, the nervous system is off. You have to assess that and treat it accordingly. Meaning that if things are not working right, either that's not the day to train at 95% your 1RM, or maybe that's a day.
So Blaine, talking on that, injury side of things, what are some of the top three things or three biggest things that athletes can do to limit injury, and just stay healthy, especially as they go throughout their seasons?
You know what's interesting about this, Zach? It's going to be a little bit of a repeat information. Couple things. Number one is nutrition, which I'm not a nutritionalist, but I think that's highly important in the prospect of making sure that the food groups going into your body are going to give your body what it needs enough to prepare. Because every time you train, you break down. And if you continue to break down, eventually something's going to break. So nutrition is going to be critical. Second thing is going to be mobility. I think body parts that don't move and then you put them under load and force them to move into positions they're not capable of is going to create tissue trauma. And I think the other thing that we've talked about again is very poor technique. I think, well, actually, there's a fourth one, but poor technique will be one. And then that bleeds into, if you're neurally not engaged in what you're supposed to be doing, the risk for injury is significantly high. So that's probably four things I would look at when it comes to this. I think another aside on this would be bleeding into where if you have a coach that's not necessarily familiar or well enough educated to take you through some of the processes that you need to go through as an athlete. That's why I've seen a few coaches actually work very well because they work together, which is nice. Each one of them has their own specialty, but I think those are all key structured components that need to be evaluated when you're looking at prevention as you're going through on that.
Okay, gotcha. On the other end of things, what can athletes do, or say the three biggest things again, to optimize their performance, and be able to, grow and put on that muscle mass that they desire?
Interesting. That's just the flip side of the same coin, right?
Hmm.
So make sure you get really strong nutritional education. Make sure you really commit to that over the long term, because again, nutrition is going to be critical in giving your body what it needs in order to be optimal. Mobility is another thing, making sure the mobility of the body is such that you can go through the movement patterns you want. And I think finally, the other thing to optimize is to make sure you have a really good coach. I'm not saying training plan, because plans can be all over the board. There can be all sorts of different coaching, of which you will all do well, you should, but the coach has to be on point with everything. Part of my little thing is making sure your coach does the movement patterns and the work the way he's going to be teaching it. By that I mean I guess I'm not a real big fan of somebody coming to teach me how to squat when they've got a 135 squat or a 225 squat. I kind of like somebody to be in the same zone as me in the 500 squat category, because then they know what the fear factor is like when you're getting under that much weight, what happens to your nervous system when you get under that much weight. And I realize it's relative, in the sense of maybe 225 is max for that individual. But I think it's important that somebody's kind of in the zone with you on that. We could even go, I don't run. But if somebody's going to teach you running, let's make sure that they're a runner, that they've done a marathon, that they understand the process and they understand the journey that you have to take in order to get through to that. So that's one of my little things. I'm sure it's very arguable. I'm sure people will yell at me for that, but that's fine. That's my gig.
No, and that's totally fair. And yeah, I love that, different perspective and insight. And, honestly, I really agree on that. Being able to learn from someone who, you want to become, essentially. So whether that's, like I said, your coaches, your teachers, just, what do you want to be able to do? I want to be able to learn from someone that's actually done it, whether that's, in the business world, the sports world. If I want to learn to play guitar, I want to learn from someone that's, of course, really good at what they do, but they've been through the process as well. Like you said, they understand the fear factor, they understand the potential, factors, especially at those higher levels. Um, because yeah, if you don't have that insight, you don't have that perspective, it can be very difficult to, manage that process and kind of navigate all those, challenges, those failures. If you could go back and do anything to optimize your performance and to reach your highest potential, is there anything you do differently along your process that could maybe help other athletes, navigate the many kind of challenges, those failures that you face along that way?
I think the first one would be understanding the journey early. Um, Having a mentor to which could be the coach, obviously, but having a mentor or a coach that guides you through what is required instead of making as many mistakes as I did as I went through, because I didn't have that when I was trying to learn all this. The first time I got mentorship would be down in the States in South Dakota when I joined their powerlifting team. And then 3 or 4 of the big guys took me under their wing, and that's how I learned. And that was very valuable. So I think anybody starting out, if you can access, and again, I call it a mentor. So that could be a strength coach, it could be an athletic coach, but somebody to guide you through the process. I think in that case, too, the commitment and the sacrifice has to be understood from an early age. Some of my athletes settle into that sacrifice, and the results are phenomenal. Um, doesn't matter what happens, they're showing up to do what they need to do. If they miss a training session, they pick up another one down the road. I see them working hard on their recovery tactics, partially because I've made all the mistakes and I can guide them a little bit and give them that advice and direction in order for them to achieve what they need to do. Without that, you're definitely floundering. I think we even look at that in the business side of that. My wife and I have ran the businesses for over 20 years, and we didn't have any mentorship. So we've made so many mistakes. It's not even funny. But now we're actually starting to get it a little bit and we're understanding it a bit. But it would have been far better off to get somebody to help us out right from the beginning. So I think that's a big factor. And I think if I had to relive and replay my I guess, powerlifting and strength kind of journey, it would be having somebody there that would have guided me a little bit better. And again, I look at this and I'm saying, I don't want somebody just to say, hey, I got a plan. This is how I want to periodize you out. This is how we're going to set you up. I would rather have somebody that would experiment with me as I'm going along, using some of their experience in order to say, okay, we can try this, but if it doesn't work, we have to modify it and change it to do something over here. And that's the same way we run rehab. Same idea. Let's attempt this to the best of our biomechanical knowledge. And if it's not working out right, we have to be able to have that experience and expertise in order to modify that. That's the same with training and athletes. It's the same game. But if you're not able to modify it, but you're just picking up another program off the internet, yeah, you know what? It may not work that well. Okay. And I find too that some people that are just looking for another program because this one didn't work, did they sacrifice enough? Did they commit enough? Well, who's there to tell them that? And if nobody's there, they continue to flip and flop from one position, one program, one rehab facility to another. So I think that's probably my biggest advice on that one.
Yeah, that's a great insight there, Blaine. Relating to that kind of coaching side and that mentorship side of thing, was a huge thing, especially when I played. I wish I would have invested more into at least my mental game when I was younger, being able to manage, like all those challenges, those failures that you kind of go throughout that process. But like you say, any process you're going through, it's not going to be just linear, right? It's not going to be the same thing over and over. There's going to be a new challenge, a new problem each day.
Sure.
So being able to adapt to it, like you say, one plan isn't going to fit every single person or
Yeah.
every single athlete, but being able to adapt, add something here, take out something there, especially when you're in a season, right? Let's say you're having a really good week. Okay, look back on that week and think, all right, what was I doing here? So when you get into that slump or you're having that off game, that off week, you can see, all right, I just need to implement this, need to tweak this so I can get back there and stay consistent. But yeah, that's a great point there, especially just having someone to keep you, supported and consistent and accountable through that process. Because, like you say, you can try something for a month, 2 months, 3 months. Well, you may not see any results then. And if you give up then, well, you'll never know what you could actually achieve and reach your highest potential compared to, sticking in the process, having that purpose and intention, and then just modifying it along the way. So yeah, that's a very interesting and great insight there. Yeah, before we kind of end this podcast, Blaine, I want to just,
Yeah, I think
ask
Zach.
you, sorry, continue.
Well, no, I was just going to comment too, because I think that gets right into a micro level where there's a lot of data and research and EMG studies with respect to even what exercises to use that best engage those muscles. I get it. I follow the research. I understand it. But sometimes you have to modify that for whatever reason, the DNA that you're working with in front of you with your athlete, that one just may not click. So you have to experiment based on assessing, evaluating, and then finding out if that gave you results or not. And again, that's that long-term commitment to the training plan. Hip thrusts. Yeah, great glute contraction, great EMG studies. Love it. Fantastic. I never do them because they don't necessarily work for me. I'd rather be on my feet doing something upright, the way the nervous system wants to react to that. So you have to even get down to those micro levels. But again, it feeds back into the fact that if you've got a mentor that's not been on that journey, you might miss out on something. But again, we talked about it before. You can have the worst program in the world, but if you show up over and over and over again, you get something out of it, but you may not get to the next level that you want to achieve.
For sure, right? That consistency piece is huge, just staying committed to the process. If you actually want to, reach that higher potential and yeah, get the results you want, because it's a long-term game, especially if you have big goals, big aspirations. You want to win that championship, you want to win that MVP. I want to gain, 20 pounds, 30 pounds of muscle and look like this. Okay, that's awesome, but understand it's going to take a longer period of time to get there. So again, what are you willing to sacrifice in order to get there and stay committed
Yeah,
along that process rather than just implementing something once, trying it failing and thinking it's never going to work down the line. But like you say,
yeah,
just showing up every single day is the biggest piece to get any success and any result you really want.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Blaine, before we kind of end this podcast here, I want to just ask you, if you have any other insights or any other thoughts that you feel like could benefit athletes or others in general, just moving forward to be able to perform and, optimize their performance and potential.
I would say the biggest thing I can explain to people is the nervous system is probably the holy grail to what you need to be able to engage, train, transform, adapt. That's the key. So that comes from the brain down. And If you can't figure that out, then you're going to struggle. What does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, I guess you have to figure out what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what's your goal. And are you committed to that goal? Does that goal have an action plan? Because I can write goals down all day long that don't mean shit if I can't create an action plan that won't get me there. And then you commit to the action plan. That's all neural. That's all brain. Okay. That's just you committing to something. That's all brain. Form is brain. Showing up every day is brain. So if your mind isn't in it, you know what? Find a different job.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, no, that's a great perspective. And again, just how everything relates, how everything starts in the mind to show up, actually grow, get the results you want long term. And yeah, how important that piece is moving forward. So, yeah, Blaine, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to sit down on the podcast with us today, share your insights, experience, stories, and perspective that I know can benefit so many others, whether it's athletes or not moving forward. So yeah, I just want to thank you very much for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us today.
That's excellent. So if The Rock ever watches this, tell him that I can outwork him.
Sounds good. Well, okay, let's get it down in the comments. Get The Rock watching this video and commenting
That's
on
what
it.
I want. The gauntlet has been thrown, the gloves out. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Blaine versus The Rock. I'm in. I want to see it.
Thanks, Zach.
So awesome. Thanks a lot, Blaine. And thanks to the others joining us on the podcast today. As always, never settle for average and continue to reach your highest potential on the grind road to success.